consciousness. Today we're going to discuss, consciousness. What is consciousness? What is existence? What is experience? What is awareness? What is awareness? What is awareness? What is awakening? What is enlightenment? What is gangstalking? What is targeted? What is awareness? What is awakening? What is enlightenment? What is the correlation? What is the coordinates? What is the disparity? Is there a dichotomy between awareness, awakening, and enlightenment? Or are they like a chain tandem of sequential events that occur in different order? Which precedes the other? Does awareness precedes awakening? Does awakening precedes enlightenment? What is awareness? What is awakening? What is enlightenment? What causes a person to become aware? What is aware? What is awareness? What is awake? What is awakening? What you are awakening to? What you are awakening to? What you are becoming enlightened to? What you are awake to? Awakening, awareness, and enlightenment. They are a trichotomy. They share no commonality whatsoever. The only correlation they share is the fact that all of these three spiritual or immaterial elements are really conducive to pivoting to a higher level of consciousness. But it all has to do with a sort of perception. Oh my God, I'm freaking killing it, yo. I'm killing it. So basically they're all based on a perception, a certain type of perception. The way we perceive, and I look so freaking handsome today, yo. Check out your boy, man. Oh my God, my apology, I have to have a superficial moment. Nah. Nevertheless, so on a serious note, so you have awareness, you have awakening, you have enlightenment. Then what is realization? What is self-realization? What is higher consciousness? What is awareness? What is the disparity between awareness and awakening? What are you becoming aware to? What are you becoming awakening to? What are you becoming enlightened to? What is enlightenment? What is enlighten? What is enlighten? What does that mean? What does awake mean? What does a mean? What does a where mean? What does a in where mean? This is where we get into the linguistic aspect of consciousness, the linguistic aspect of awareness, the linguistic aspect of awakening, excuse me, the linguistics aspect of enlightenment, right? And all of this phenomena is conducive to one fundamental metaphysical and phenomenological phenomena in reality, and that is what we call coincidences. I'm freaking killing it, yo. Hallelujah. Coincidences. What causes, and you have awareness, you have awakening, and enlightenment. Awareness comes first. Awareness always comes first. No exception, because coincidences, by definition, is a correlation between mutually exclusive events or scenario, or a correspondence in or an event, or occurrence in time. Correspondence in event or occurrence in time, or correlation between mutually exclusive events or scenario, which means that these events or scenarios share no common denominator whatsoever. Coincidences. Coincidences is a scientific interpretation of highly improbable event or scenario that will inevitably occur invariably based on based on an infinite amount of chaos. You know, this is from a physics perspective, interpretation of coincidences is, you know, based on an infinite amount of chaos. You know, infinity. If you have chaos, infinity, narrative is inevitable. Meaning that an antecedent, chaos precedes order. But it's sort of dualistic, because if it's antecedent, chaos precedes order, then it's paradoxical, because if chaos precedes order, and we dealing with a form of energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy in and of itself, the existence of energy is eternal and infinite. Then if chaos is the antecedent of order and chaos precedes order, then it's paradoxical and feasible to assert then order precedes chaos. They're contingent on each other. You cannot have order without chaos, and you cannot have chaos without order. So it's a paradoxical, dualistic symbiosis that's contingent on each other. We call this philosophical term infinite regress. I'm freaking killing it, boy, I'm killing it. I'm so feeling myself right now. I'm orgasming right now with intellectualism. I apologize, I'm just playing. So now from a metaphysical perspective, coincidences is attributed to what we call synchronicity. You know, synchronicity and coincidences are defined interchangeably in the dictionary, at least the 5 top dictionary, the Oxford, the Cambridge, blah, 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 the Merriam and the American dictionary, right? Correspondence in event or course in time, or correlation between mutually exclusive, blah, 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 blah. So from a metaphysical perspective, coincidences is defined as synchronicity or serendipity. Serendipity, you know, serendipity and synchronicity are often used interchangeably, but the disparity is the fact that these, one example is you come to the United States to become a famous actor, but you end up playing football and you end up becoming famous, right? So serendipity is when you have a chain of events, right, that does not work out in your favor, but the synchronistic chain of futuristic event sort of outlay favorable and advantageous outcomes in your favor. So from a metaphysical perspective, coincidences is defined as synchronicity. Now coincidences is defined as coincidence from a scientific perspective, because from a primarily a scientific world have a radical materialistic worldview. And from a metaphysical perspective, metaphysics have a sort of idealistic, a staunch idealistic interpretation of coincidences. So from a radical materialistic, materialism basically means that when you have this philosophy that because of the physical body and the physical brain and the neuron firings between synapses, this is what implicates the emergence of mind, thoughts, experience, belief, emotions, and feelings, you know. And this is where all our physiological, psychological, and emotional attributes derive from this materialistic worldview. So coincidences have a materialistic interpretation. Now from a metaphysical perspective, now they have more like a staunch idealistic interpretation, because metaphysics now, you know, we get into metaphysics, is the fact that idealism now posits that mind, thoughts, and experience is the fundamental substance in the universe. You know, materialism postulates that it's the physical body, the physical brain, and the neurons firing between synapses is what implicates the emergence of mind, thoughts, experience, belief, emotions, and feelings. So the paradox here between idealism and materialism is not that the rivalry, right? The rivalry is not really conducive to a polarity in interpretation. Look at the car almost hit me. Yeah? It's not the polarity of interpretation. The argument between radical materialism and staunch idealism is primary substance. But both phenomena is contingent on each other, because mind, thoughts, and experience is the fundamental substance of the universe. Then the physical body, the physical brain, and the neurons that fire in between synapses, all of this, it all implicates the emergence of the byproducts of idealism. And even if we take a radical materialistic philosophical ideology, it postulates that mind, thought, and experience is not the fundamental, but is a byproduct or a secondary. Are you all with me? My whole point was to explain the difference between idealism, staunch idealism, and radical materialism. And you all understand what staunch means and what and radical mean. So this is how we derive to coincidences, and this is how we derive to synchronicity. Now, metaphysics now is really defined as metaphysics is a philosophical ideology that postulates that how do you define metaphysics? You know, how do you define metaphysics? Metaphysics, right? Metaphysics. How do you define metaphysics in the strictest? How do you articulate? Metaphysics postulates that is a philosophy that so metaphysics is a philosophical ideology that study the fundamental nature of reality, right? It examines the relationship between mind and matter, substance and attribute. So you have mind, you have matter. Both terms can be used interchangeably, and then you have substance and attribute. And metaphysics now places an emphasis on the relationship, the correlation, the symbiosis between mind and matter, or substance and attribute. We could consider mind as substance and matter as attributes, right? And its relationship to reality. So when we look at synchronicity from a metaphysical perspective, which is a materialistic interpretation of coincidences, right? It's also a phenomenological interpretation, because phenomenology now is a branch of philosophy that also studies the fundamental nature of reality, but it takes a very peculiar, skewed interest in emphasis in the structure. The structure, you all hear me? The structure of consciousness. The structure of consciousness and human experience. And synchronicity is a byproduct of mind and matter, substance and attribute, and structure of consciousness and human experience. And why we can conclude indefinitely that synchronicity, aka coincidences. Now, these two terms are used interchangeably. They're not mutually exclusive, you know. They have different terms because they're coming from mutually exclusive school gangstalking. These interpretations are coming from mutually exclusive schools of interpretation, staunch idealists and radical materialists. The whole objective of this discussion is to discuss the trichotomy between awareness, awakening, and enlightenment. And to get into awareness, to get into awakening, to get into enlightenment, to get into realization, to get into self-realization, to get into illumination, we have to get into the elephant in the room, the fundamental crux of it all. We have to get into coincidences, aka synchronicity. We have to have a fundamental philosophical, psychological, and physiological and cognitive neuroscientific understanding of what truly is the fundamental underlying mechanism, the crux, the hallmark that govern what we call synchronicity and coincidences. And I'm going to decipher and break this down on a molecular level. Microcosmic and macrocosmic. I'm freaking killing it, yo! So we've established all these different interpretations of coincidences and what coincidences is, what synchronicity is, and what are the variances, what are the variables, and what are the different interpretations. Now, what is the relationship between coincidences and synchronicities and the nature of reality? The nature of reality. Now, these are really deep, existentialistic, epistemological, an ontological question. Existentialism studies existence. Epistemology deals with the knowledge of existence. So, and it's an ontological, so, coincidences and synchronicity in terms of, and remember, this discussion is about awareness, awakening, and enlightenment. But we have to explore existentialism, the nature of reality, the nature of existence, epistemology, the knowledge of this interpretation of this existence, metaphysics, mind and matter, substance and attribute, immaterial, material, intangible, tangible, inorganic, organic, animate and inanimate. So coincidences now is like from an existentialistic standpoint, it's a glitch. It's an irregularity in nature, you know. And as I said earlier, physics defines synchronicity as coincidences. Their interpretation is based on an infinite amount of chaos narrative is inevitable. You know, psychology now have a completely different perspective of coincidences, to me, which I find is a fascinating phenomenon, because psychology now attribute coincidences to, not based on an infinite amount of chaos narrative is inevitable. Psychology now interpret coincidences on selective reasoning and confirmation bias. Selective reasoning and confirmation bias. So you see we have a huge contention here. It's not the interpretation, but the mutually exclusive, the dichotomic or the trichotomic schools of interpretation of a same phenomena. So psychology attribute coincidences to confirmation bias or selective reasoning. You select this correspondence in event or occurrence in time, or you select, or confirmation bias. Or from a psychological perspective, you find coordinates, you find correlations, you find patterns in nature. You attribute multiple simultaneous 1-1-1s in nature, or multiple correspondence. So anything that correlates or corresponds or share a single common denominator or multiple common denominators, we call that confirmation bias. Now, from a biological perspective, coincidence have a completely different perspective. You know, completely different perspective from a biological, evolutionary biological perspective. Coincidence is attributed to our survival pattern recognition. You know, because of Homo sapiens preceding back to antiquity, our survival mechanism was contingent on pattern recognition. So from a biological perspective, or evolutionary biological perspective, right, coincidences now is attributed to pattern recognition. You know, preceding back to antiquity, Homo sapiens, our survival mechanism was contingent on pattern recognition. You know, one example is you go hunting, you hear a rattle in the bush, and you automatically make assumption because our survival mechanism was contingent on pattern recognition. So that's from a biological perspective, aka biological perspective, aka cognitive neuroscientific perspective as well. So you see, so you have the physics interpretation of coincidences, which is based on an infinite amount of chaos narrative is inevitable. Then you have the psychological interpretation, which is based on selective reasoning and confirmation bias, and you have an evolutionary biological interpretation of the same coincidences as a same coincidental interpretation as what? As pattern recognition. And then you have the metaphysical interpretation. Now, metaphysical is, and then you have the spiritual interpretation, you know, which attribute to coincidences, aka synchronicity, to a divine intervention, and external divine intervention. This is where we get into areas like pantheism. You know, when we look at the spiritual interpretation of coincidences, aka synchronicity, now have a different interpretation. It's like a standalone interpretation, and this interpretation is more from like a pantheism, a pantheistic, and a panentheism, panentheistic interpretation. And pantheism postulates that the universe is synonymous with an external divine intervention. So you have the universe, but it's also an external divine intervention. Call it source code, call it God, whatever term you deem the infinite, ultimate energy, source of it all. And then panentheism postulates now that, you know, that this same external divine intervention, you know, unlike pantheism that postulates that the universe is synonymous with an external divine intervention, Panentheism now posits that an external divine intervention interpenetrates the universe, simultaneously existing outside space and time. So pantheism postulates that the universe is synonymous with an external divine intervention, while panentheism postulates that this external divine intervention that is synonymous with the universe simultaneously exists outside space and time. And then you have, so you have pantheism, you have panentheism, and then you have panpsychism, or panpsychism, or panpsychism. Can't pronounce that last term. Can't pronounce that last. The peculiar, obscure, philosophical definitions are so difficult to pronounce. So panpsychism or panpsychism postulates that all matter on a universal, primordial, primitive level have ingrained in it on an infinitesimal level some level of consciousness. What's my point for saying this? Panentheism, and then you have animism. Animism postulates that all matter on a fundamental level still possess a spirit and a soul, while hylozoism now, right, posits that, you know, all matter on an infinitesimal level that possesses spirit and a soul is actually alive. It possesses life. It possesses, you know, the animate, the inanimate, the tangible, the intangible, organic or inorganic, possess a spirit and a soul on an infinitesimal molecular level. That's the animistic interpretation. Hylozoism now postulates that all these things is alive. So what does pantheism, panentheism, panpsychism, animism, and hylozoism, what does this all have to do? What does this all have to do with this all ties into the spiritual interpretation of coincidences? Because from a spiritual perspective now, a lot of spiritual or divine or religious interpretation of coincidences or synchronicity, you know, attributed to an external divine intervention that interpenetrates the universe, simultaneously existed outside space and time. Whether we can conduce this to our angels or spiritual guide, whatever you do. So you have the spiritual interpretation, you have the metaphysical interpretation, you have the physics interpretation of coincidences, aka synchronicity. You have the scientific radical materialist, you have the staunch idealist. All this ties into, so to understand all the different interpretations of coincidences and synchronicity, we have to understand all the polarized intellectual and academical schools of thoughts and interpretations, and what are their fundamental, you hear me? To understand coincidences and synchronicity, you have to understand all the mutually exclusive, all the disparate academic schools of interpretations of synchronicity, and aka also called coincidences, and what are their fundamental ideology that they are using to derive to these conclusions. So now that we've covered some of the basic schools of interpretation of coincidences and synchronicity and the basic philosophy that derive to these conclusions, let's explore the existentialistic, epistemological, the metaphysical, primarily the ontological, because ontology is a branch of metaphysics. You know, metaphysics studies the fundamental nature of reality. You know, it takes a keen interest in mind and matter. There's a gap between mind and there's a gap between matter. And to really understand metaphysics interpretation of mind and matter, we have to get into what is matter? Matter. We have to get into what is gravity, and we have to get into what is energy. Because when we're discussing metaphysics, and we're discussing the fundamental nature of reality, and we get it into ontology, which is a branch of metaphysics, or a subset, or a secondary byproduct of metaphysics, which studies the nature of being. We have to study the subsets of this ontological being simultaneously coexisting in our reality, metaphysics, mind and matter. And you have mind and you have matter. And then you have coincidences deriving from what occurs between mind and matter, because between mind and matter, you have something called matter. You have three fundamental elements in nature. That's a precursor before we have these coincidences or synchronistic events. So you have mind, you have matter, and then you have what we call matter, we have energy, and we have gravity. So we have matter, we have energy, and we have gravity. They are a trichotomy, right? They're all contingent on each other, but they're like the matter. When we discuss in metaphysics and we discuss in mind and matter or substance and attributes, when we explore in substance and attributes, that's gap between mind and the materialization of matter into the synchronistic change of synchronistic or serendipitous or coincidental events. There are three fundamental elements that occur simultaneously in a symbiosis. Mind, you have matter, you have energy, and you have gravity. And these three elements are independently interdependent. Mind, you have matter, you have energy, and you have gravity. And to understand matter, energy, and gravity, you have to study the endocrine system. The endocrine system, right, is a group of glands, right, or organs, right, existing within the human body, right. Its function is to distribute, regulate, and modulate the secretions of hormones within the circulatory system. So you have a circulatory systems, and you have a group of glands or organs existing within the system, right, and its function is to distribute, regulate, and modulate the secretions of hormones within the circulatory system, right? This is how homeostasis is maintained. Homeostasis is basically a biological term for equilibrium between interdependently independent elements. So you have the endocrine system, but they're independently interdependent. You have the pituitary, you have your pineal, you have the thymus, you have the thyroids, you have the adrenal. I can't remember all the terms. And this is how matter, energy, and gravity operates. Now, matter has nothing to do with gravity, and energy has nothing to do with gravity. But simultaneously, they're contingent on each other. Matter may have energy, it may not have energy. That's a whole different discussion. So where were we? So what? So coincidences now. We've covered all the different variables. Coincidences like a glitch. It's an irregularity in nature. Now, if you study coincidences, you're going to notice something, right? They say if it's coincidences, then by definition, it should only occur once. It should only occur once by definition because coincidences. Coincidences, by definition, is self-explanatory. It should only occur once. How? If it reoccurs. It reoccurs. And from a radical, materialistic, scientific perspective, let's take a scientific approach to this phenomenon right here. If something reoccurs in nature, if it reoccurs, it has a pattern. Anything that reoccurs, it has a pattern because it repeats. If something repeats, if it reoccurs, it has a pattern. And if it has a pattern, it has a law. Any phenomenon in nature that occurs, any pattern in nature, any phenomenon in nature that reoccurs, it has a pattern. A pattern derives from a reoccurrence. Patterns is when we draw a conclusion based on the reoccurrence of a phenomenon, the repetition of a phenomenon. So if it reoccurs, if it has a pattern, right? If it reoccurs, if it repeats, if it replicates, if it has a pattern, and if it has a pattern, it has a law. This is a scientific, radical, materialistic worldview. We're not even looking at this coincidences and synchronicity from a metaphysical or spiritual standpoint. We're taking the hardcore, radical, materialistic, scientific, non-spiritual interpretation of coincidences. Because 99.9% of you all right now can conclude with me indefinitely that most of you all have had multiple. If I say to you right now, give me a coincidental story, most of you all could give me an infinite amount of stories. You don't even know where to start. So, if it reoccurs, it has a pattern. If it has a pattern, it has a law. It's a law. Because a law is from a radical, materialistic, scientific standpoint, a law is when we draw conclusion based on the consistency of reoccurring patterns in nature. I'm freaking brilliant, yo! I'm just playing. So you get my point? If it reoccurs, it has a pattern. If it has a pattern, it has a law. If it has a law, it can be replicated. If it has a law, it can be replicated. It's not coincidences. It's a lie. So if it repeats, it has a pattern. If it has a pattern, it has a law. If it has a law, it can be replicated. Now we need to understand what is causing coincidences to repeat itself. What is causing coincidences to repeat itself? Why is coincidences repeating itself? Why does coincidence, what is synchronous? Why is it repeating itself? I'll tell you why. I'll tell you exactly why. The reason why coincidences, the reason why synchronicity or serendipity is repeating itself is because of this. It's a metaphysical phenomenon. Because if you look at all coincidences across the board, no exception, every single coincidence across the board share one single breaking the matrix today, breaking the matrix today, breaking the freaking matrix today. All coincidences, aka synchronicity, share one single common denominator across the board. Just one. And that one single common denominator, put your thoughts together, and that one single common denominator that all synchronicity, aka coincidences, share across the board is a metaphysical and a phenomenological phenomenon. And that is a byproduct of mind and matter, substance and attribute. All coincidences share by a relationship between mind and matter and substance and attribute. And this is what they don't want you to know. Now, all this is to discuss awareness, awakening, and enlightenment. Because the objective of this video is to discuss awareness, awakening, and enlightenment. And awakening. Awareness, actually, my apologies. You have awareness, you have awakening, and you have enlightenment. No, awareness is when you begin to see these coincidences in nature. When you begin to see the coincidences in nature. Now we're going to get into another discussion where we get into now awareness, awakening, and enlightenment. But this is part one. Part one of a chain of upcoming discussions on awareness, awakening, enlightenment, self-realization, realization, and consciousness.